never had a pet of my own, but I did read somewhere quite recently that over 60% of Canadian households have them, that over 25% of those households let those pets, typically dogs and cats, sleep in the same bed as the owners, and that 10% of those owners prefer their pets to their spouses. Only 10. So you can see a service that clones pets could be really successful. And apparently, while cloning is certainly controversial in the case of humans and not yet, to our knowledge, successfully achieved, cloning animals apparently is, well, a practical technology. The first cloned kitten was called CC, and it achieved enormous publicity, which is how I first came to know about genetic savings and clone. You've got to love that name. And the guy who created it, Hawthorne, has finally agreed, after 3 years of chasing him, to come up here and tell us about his business. Business, by the way, is booming. It costs $50,000 to clone a pet, and Lou is booked solid for, what, the whole of next year. Yeah. Lou Hawthorne.
Hello, everyone. So that is actually the title of my talk. That is not our slogan. The slogan we've always wanted is GSC, we bring good things to life again. But our lawyers have told us there's just no way we're going to get that slogan. Why clone pets? It all started with Missy, this dog. Missy was an amazing dog. She's my mom's dog, and my mom happened to know a very wealthy man who fell in love with Missy and decided he wanted one of his own, since she wasn't going to give Missy up. So that's how it started. Shortly after Dolly was cloned, he said he wanted to clone Missy, and I said I'd look into it, because I wanted a Missy as well. So cloning a dog is actually a lot harder than cloning a sheep, it turns out. And as soon as I was given the mandate to clone Missy, I started researching it, and I went to all the usual places, Roslin Institute, where Dolly was cloned, and just about every other cloning scientist in the world, and they all said, oh, dogs, boy, whew. They either laughed it off, or they said, you will probably never succeed. They are incredibly difficult and very poorly understood, for reasons I'll get to. But we took a number of applications from people that were interested, and we ended up giving the contract to Texas A&M, and word leaked out about that pretty quickly, and it was very well covered in the media. Wired magazine did a big spread on it, and BBC, and just about everybody you can imagine. And the response was so strong from the people who heard that we were cloning a dog. We received thousands of phone calls and emails from people who wanted us to clone their own dog or cat, or if we couldn't do that, gene bank it at least for the day when we could. So we just kind of scratching our heads. We didn't set out to launch a business. We were just trying to clone this one dog. And so in February of 2000, we launched Genetic Savings and Clone. The first breakthrough we have yet to succeed on dogs. Our projected date now for dog is about January or February of 2005. But in 2002, we cloned the world's first cat through our partnership with Texas A&M. We now refer to it as our problem kitty, CC for copycat. The reason it was a problem is that we have the dubious distinction of having produced the world's first clone that does not resemble its genetic donor. You can imagine what this did for our press. It was an absolute nightmare, and it actually was a lab accident. I had chosen a specific cell line belonging to a cat named Tundra that was owned by a smart, articulate, successful woman, and in the lab, they just arbitrarily switched out the cell line for a calico cell line. Well, calicos turn out to be the one breed of cat and dog that you cannot clone. And the reason is that they are a cellular mosaic. They are a mosaic of two different cell types. One cell type makes orange and white cells. One cell type makes black and white cells. It's called X-linked inactivation. Again, I won't go into it. But if you pull one cell from that animal and clone it, you will get either an orange and white cat or a black and white cat, but you will not get an orange, black, and white cat. So we've been working very hard to live this down. And we got press all over the world, none of which did us any good, because it went to the heart of our business, which is, of course, resemblance. Resemblance of physical resemblance and resemblance of personality. That's what people want. Personality is a little trickier, but physical resemblance, you look at the clones of any other species, hundreds of individuals in a variety of species, and they look identical. And in 6 weeks, we're going to make an announcement that's going to finally put this to rest. There's no reason at all not to be doing human cloning for therapeutics. These little pseudo-embryos, they're no more sentient than a few cells off the skin of your hand. Quickly, you're all familiar with the cloning of Dolly. It starts with the cell, then there's gene banking, cryopreservation, then there's the enucleation of the egg, and then production of the embryo over here goes into the cat or whatever the animal is, and it gets carried to term and given birth naturally. We add a step. This is CT, chromatin transfer, not NT, nuclear transfer, which is how Dolly was made. This step de-differentiates the donor cell because there are problems and health problems in clones to date that trace back to the donor cell being incompletely reprogrammed. And CT, the technology that we're using, doesn't do that. So it's virtually indistinguishable from IVF or natural conception. I'm going to skip this. We also are heavy into assessing ova using very advanced technology. Basically, it's like making an omelet. You have to start with good eggs. We're also developing an artificial oviduct using microfluidic technology. That's what we've had to do because dogs ovulate immature eggs. So the eggs are matured not in the ovaries like in all other mammals, but in the oviduct downstream. Nothing but fertilization happens in other mammals. So we're having to construct an artificial oviduct. I just never, who would have thought, you know? It blows my mind. I'm out of time. I wanted to talk about cloning fears. I was on a radio show where they said, aren't you afraid that your technology will be used to produce a cloned army that follows orders unquestioningly? And of course my response is, well, we already have such an army. I mean, what difference would it make if they were biologically, genetically identical? So human cloning, I don't understand what the big fuss is. We have no involvement in it, but human therapeutic cloning, I mean, we've got morons running in our government in the States. I'm sure that may have occurred to you as well, but there's no reason at all not to be doing human cloning for therapeutics. These little pseudo-embryos, they're no more sentient than a few cells off the skin of your hand. And if they can help someone who is sentient, who's suffering, or a suffering child, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But what I want to end with is how I got insight into human reproductive cloning. I used to be opposed to it, and now we don't do it, but I have an insight into it. My wife and I had a stillbirth. Our first child was born dead. And we were intensely bonded to it before the stillbirth. And anybody who's ever had one knows exactly what I mean. But there was a moment in the hospital where the nurse came in and took a little genetic sample. And in my altered grief state, I thought, oh yeah, they're going to clone it. And of course, it turned out to be just to find out if, you know, for the autopsy or why it had died. And why she had died. But in that moment, I understood. And I chose not to and was rewarded for it. But I understood. So I want to end with a short video about my son, Sky, my reward for not cloning Sierra. Hey, Sky, you want to go have a jam session?
Sure. And sit down.
Plug it in.
Plug it in. Okay. Hey, Daddy, look at that motorcycle go by.